How to Build Inclusive Martial Arts Environments and Eradicate Toxic Martial Arts Culture, an Anti-Discrimination Approach. Introduction. This article addresses issues of toxic martial arts culture and proposes a pathway to inclusiveness that accommodates both the normative martial arts folks and the diversified identities / non-currently typical martial arts folks within a training environment. In part, this article is written to address and assist in removing perspective bias held by the typical male-type figures in regions where females, LGBTQ+ identities, ethno-cultural diversity, differences of ability, and socio-economic diversity are seldom encountered in the dojo, gym, club, or other martial arts training setting and broader organizational culture. Opening with the foundational truths of the martial arts, this article moves on to define linguistic violence and examine its role in martial arts communities and environments, concluding with an 8-action process to remove toxicity and improve inclusiveness in martial arts environments and communities. Not everywhere in the world has difficulty providing inclusive and authentic training environments, but in the regions that do struggle to provide such environments, training groups where the environment has rarely or never attracted or welcomed anything but a generalized male type, it can seem to practitioners as though their training environment is indicative of training environments everywhere, creating a distorted view of the normative martial artist. That perspective bias produces an idea of martial artists that is both false and harmful. Training environments are as varied as cultures and communities themselves, built by choice and action. This article aims to support the development of inclusive training environments and martial arts organizations by providing tools to those whose training environments have had limited inclusiveness by choice, happenstance, or social location. 1. Foundational truths of the martial arts. Martial arts are about bodies intersecting in a particular space and time. The principles of physics apply to every body, without exception. Physicality influences the most effective pathway of technique. Ideological and identity particularities influence the ethic through which martial knowledge is obtained, enacted, and applied. What works to survive or prevent violence comes from a gestalt of physicality, opponent, terrain, resources, goals. Each martial arts practitioner has different interests, aptitudes, and challenges, and the key for instructors and training partners is to cater or adapt to that individuality while pursuing and providing quality training regardless of differences in physicality or identity. 2. Linguistic violence and normative ways of doing. One of the immediate challenges a non-inclusive training environment must tackle is its linguistic violence. A form of social violence, linguistic violence is cultural propaganda used to create and reinforce hierarchical notions of power and importance, exclusion and belonging. Language can be spoken or unspoken, behavioral, written, and/or environmental. For martial artists, environmental language includes the arrangement of items, bodies, facilities, standards, and rituals within a dojo, training space, or community. In non-inclusive martial training environments, dojos, groups, and communities, it is common for both purposeful and unintended forms of linguistic violence to be present in the normative ways of doing for that group and environment. Acts of linguistic violence range from threatening and/or shunning body language to spoken prejudices / threats to normative ways of doing that enact and reinforce exclusion, prejudice, othering, marginalization, and discrimination. A key feature of linguistic violence is the use of hierarchy and shame to perpetuate the rituals of who is included and celebrated and who is excluded and ridiculed, i.e., gatekeeping. Every social situation and every organized group has rituals of interaction that are based on and reinforce what is normal for that setting or group, from spoken indicators to unspoken indicators. Spoken indicators, vocal, sign, text, or otherwise, include terms used to refer to persons both present / accepted in and absent / rejected from the space, i.e. the us versus them. Terms used to refer to actions taken and goals set within the space, for example, don't be a pussy versus tough out another rep, and the openly stated ethical rules pertaining to standards of interaction and achievement. Unspoken indicators include the resources provided to attendees, for example, restroom facilities, equipment, information, and opportunities, the design of the physical space, in other words, accessibility for whom, welcoming to whom, the unspoken ethical rules of interaction, standards, and achievement, and the enactment of standards and rules, which may differ from spoken expectations. The gestalt of spoken, vocal, sign, text, or otherwise, and unspoken indicators and rituals of interaction of a training group, space, or community creates its normative ways of doing. Linguistic violence at its core can be understood as both an appeal to authority and an attempt to authority. A person who participates in the social or linguistic violence of a community is participating in the normative rituals that confer and convey belonging and strength, or power and importance, within that environment, is expressing an appeal to inclusion via the enactment of and subservience to social authority. Unfortunately, the enactment of ritual to convey belonging and strength is often mistaken as an embodiment of competency. When expressed in words, spoken, sign, text, or otherwise, linguistic violence reproduces and reinforces some aspect of social hierarchy in an attempt to include the person doing the expressing within an approved identity. When a person expressing linguistic violence shares aspects of identity with what is being excluded or ridiculed, this expression of internalized violence and lateral violence is also an appeal to inclusion via the outward enactment of and subservience to social authority. When expressed in environments through systems of organizing, infrastructural design, resource access, or other gatekeeping, linguistic violence reproduces and reinforces hierarchies of exclusion and belonging through normative ways of doing. A key aspect of social violence is a mistaken association of certain expressions and rituals to power and importance. A person may mistakenly believe that loud, repetitive, cruel, or threatening behaviors convey and confer power and importance, just as a person may believe that certain belongings, terms, resources, or beliefs convey and confer power and importance. In martial arts settings, such attempts to power and importance might be located in the design of the training space, an appeal to authority through adherence to tradition or through displays of wealth, in terms used to refer to targets, goals, techniques, tools, and persons, or the application of cruelty and/or hierarchy to create illusions of power and strength, and in performance standards that value one set way of doing or being over other viable modes of doing and being. Actions and attitudes of instructors and community leaders set the tone for community culture, and give permission or deny approval for certain behaviors within the community. Intense resistance to change is often encountered in martial arts practitioners for whom linguistic violence is entangled with their definitions of competency and success. In other words, in practitioners whose sense of worth and identity is entangled with harmful and false notions of hierarchy, power, and importance. Insult versus accommodation. The impulse to provide any one student or type of student with less than our best integrity as training partners and instructors is an insult to our community and art. As training partners and instructors, it is our responsibility to train within the limit of our students' and training partners' current level of ability while providing an authentic, welcoming, and challenging training experience. Anyone who gets easily bored working with new and lesser experienced students has forgotten important fundamentals about what it means to study the martial arts. Differences in identity, physicality, social location, or the combination of ethno-cultural origin, socio-economic location, orientation, gender, etc., and lived experience may alter the training needs, interests, motivations, attitudes, and aptitudes of practitioners. However, it is a mistake to assume that a practitioner's identity, physicality, social location, or lived experience reduces the quality of relevant training they should receive. Specialized approaches when requested or necessitated are accommodating, but insulting when unwelcome or unnecessary. For example, requiring that all persons wear the appropriate protective gear for their anatomy is sensible. Requiring that persons wear a specific color of gear associated to their perceived or chosen gender is sexist. Requiring female practitioners to wear a different training outfit than male practitioners is sexist, but allowing practitioners who menstruate to wear black training pants instead of white is providing an accommodation. Most inclusive is a policy allowing practitioners regardless of anatomy to choose between dark-colored and light-colored dogi, at least where light-colored dogi is the norm. A simple thought experiment can help to reveal when a specialized approach is prejudicial rather than accommodating. Imagine a new student who is different from the normative identities/bodies of the training group. It may help to imagine someone very different from yourself. What are the differences of instruction, resources, and training that you imagine that new student would want or need to receive? Now imagine that you are that new student, exactly like yourself, but with an instructor perceiving and categorizing you in that same way you just categorized the non-normative identity. If your first evaluations of how to approach and train the new student seem like ways you'd want to be treated yourself, then those ideas might be viable accommodations. If your first evaluations feel insulting to you, they're probably insulting to others. Sadly, many new students or practitioners perceived as non-normative are ousted or discouraged from joining training groups through actions of purposeful and accidental discrimination. In other words, through physical and linguistic violence, enacted by individuals within the community and reinforced by the design, organizational principles, atmosphere, and outcomes of that community. A common mistake made by male practitioners is the assumption that female and non-male or non-typically male practitioners need to be enticed into training by colorful clothing options and fitness-based curriculum, and treated in training with increased gentleness, reduced authenticity, and reduced intensity. To apply an example from the Bujinkan organization, at one point, purple dogi and red obi were introduced as a new option for female practitioners to wear in place of black dogi and green obi for Q-level practitioners. The introduction of the alternative dogi and obi option erred in two distinct ways. The first error was the assumption that the color of the training uniform was a predominant reason why female practitioners were not interested in studying Bujinkan martial arts or interacting with Bujinkan communities and practitioners. The second error was the misrepresentation of this new dogi option as a traditional ritual. In reality, the purple and red option was not a tradition, but a suggestion by the Sokei's wife. Despite that the alternative purple and red color options have been sensibly rejected by most of the modern Bujinkan organization, any quick web search reveals the existence of numerous blog posts, websites, and articles repeating the false claim that the purple dogi, red obi combination was the historically traditional training uniform for female practitioners. This misrepresentation of a new option as a traditional ritual demonstrates the pervasive power of perspective bias and us versus them thinking that perpetuates in non-inclusive environments, martial or otherwise, such that male martial arts practitioners might identify themselves as the normative type for their training environment to the extent of claiming for their own use only the traditional uniform originally intended for all practitioners regardless of gender. Instead of increasing diversity and inclusion, the gender-based dogi color options within the Bujinkan resulted in further othering of non-male identities within the training space and broader organizational culture. With the introduction of purple dogi and red obi came notions of kunoichi training that delivered nonsensical, ineffective versions of taijutsu technique and theory to female practitioners whose instructors assumed that differences in gender identity meant differences in achievable levels of competency. While the purple dogi and red obi may have faded into the past, some Bujinkan environments persist in supplying less than adequate training to female practitioners and in perpetuating practices rooted in sexism, from actions within training environments to statements made in online forums. For example, within the past 25 years, a common piece of advice given by both male and female shihan to female practitioners traveling away from their home dojo for training, especially for trips to the Hombu in Japan, was to bring a training partner so as to avoid being ignored by male practitioners or treated as ridiculously fragile / mistreated and injured based on their gender. Jokes versus ridicule. What is funny to one person may be ridicule to another. A joke that insults or derides a trait or topic the Universal Declaration of Human Rights cautions not to discriminate against is not a joke but ridicule. Jokes to avoid in the training environment and organizational culture include sentiments about identity, orientation, sexuality, physicality, social location, abuse, and interpersonal violence. For example, topics such as gender, orientation, ethno-cultural identity, socio-economic status, employment status, reproductive status, marital status, education, sexuality, difference of ability, age, physicality, anatomy, experiences of violence / abuse / other oppression, and spiritual affiliation. A false and harmful notion that stems from normalized linguistic violence is the idea that use of a prejudicial term lacks any harmful outcome or meaning due to the term's prevalence in a society, community, group, or culture. Within martial arts communities and training groups, this perspective bias perpetuates the mistaken notion that social violence is an integral aspect of personal strength. Some people have the notion that using ridicule and prejudicial language, jokingly or otherwise, in training toughens up martial arts practitioners. This is a false idea, on par with the mistaken notion that physically harming students beyond their capacity to tolerate pain or injury creates tougher practitioners. In reality, harming practitioners only causes harm. All tolerance capacities must be built over time and respective of the individual practitioner in order to avoid permanent injury, just like other skills. Most non-normative identities, anyone who is not a cis male, and sometimes anyone who is not a cis male of the area's ethnicity, culture, physicality, orientation, and/or socioeconomic status of majority, have been subjected to prejudicial language their whole lives, and that language has been used to try to dictate their worth, their humanity, their freedom, their opportunities, and their autonomy. Their toughness has been learned and proven along the way, as demonstrated by them showing up to study martial arts in the first place. They don't need to hear more ridicule or cruelty in the place where they are learning how to save their own and others' lives, which, aside from modern notions of sport and fitness, is the practical purpose of martial arts. Invocation of violence. It is not only jokes that perpetuate linguistic violence in training environments. Some terms and phrases contain histories of violence that are evoked for those whose identity the term or phrase is or was meant to harm or exclude. For example, the term kunoichi has a problematic history within the Bujinkan organization, where male Bujinkan practitioners gleefully proclaim that the term is meant to reference the number of orifices, and specifically the vaginal canal, present in some female anatomy. This interpretation relies on misogynistic perspective bias combined with the erroneous translation of the term kunoichi as meaning 9 plus 1. Ku, 9, no plus, ichi, 1. Male Bujinkan practitioners who believe this nonsense reject the reality that their nonsense is a form of sexism stemming from misogyny, instead invoking logical fallacies, in these instances what I term fallacies, in an attempt to justify their misogyny as a commentary on something inherent to nature. In reality, the historical etymology for the term kunoichi is an interpretation of the strokes in order used to create the kanji for woman, which may be translated or understood as ku, void or ward, no, of, ichi, 1/unit/unity. There is a clear difference in respect conveyed by the interpretation of kunoichi as meaning number of orifices versus the interpretation of kunoichi as ward of unity or as woman. Any time a Bujinkan practitioner makes a reference to kunoichi based on notions of or associations to female sexual reproductive anatomy, or the number of orifices presumed to be of a female's body, that reference is a form of linguistic violence or prejudice that others and perpetuates discrimination against female Bujinkan practitioners and Bujinkan practitioners who possess aspects of female anatomy regardless of gender identity, and, by extension, all females and all persons who possess aspects of female anatomy regardless of affiliation with the martial arts. This planet's global history of sexual violence evidences why reducing concepts of womanhood or femininity to ideas of orifices is socially violent. No person, regardless of gender, should be conceptually reduced to, categorized, or referred to by the parts of their physical anatomy and to the exclusion of their personhood. Use of the term kunoichi when meant as a person with an extra orifice evokes lived, ongoing histories of inequality and sexual violence. Normalizing sexual violence has repercussions for everyone regardless of gender. Social violence, which includes linguistic violence and sexual violence, is a poison that harms those who enact it, those who experience it, and those who witness it. For example, a Bujinkan-led, general martial arts-themed Facebook forum thrives off using the language of sexual violence and other linguistic violence to ridicule martial arts practitioners. While originally this ridicule targeted fraudulent, incompetent, and predatory persons, the forum has, in more recent years, been observed targeting mentally ill persons and victim-blaming survivors of sexual violence and interpersonal abuse. For another example, in a post thread in a highly populated Bujinkan discussion forum on Facebook, several high-ranking Bujinkan practitioners with large personal followings refer to themselves as being like gods, for their ability to lie to and gaslight their romantic partners and spouses on an ongoing basis in order to hide inappropriate habits, as though their propensity to enact financial and psychological abuse is a skill to celebrate instead of a failure of character. Discrimination is genderless. Prejudicial and discriminatory behaviors are not limited to any one gender. Misogyny is a frequent prejudice encountered and normalized within martial arts communities and cultures, but it is not the only prejudice that abides in martial arts communities and cultures. Just as online forums are not the only site where open discrimination is encountered, and just as male practitioners are not the only gender identity that expresses prejudice and enacts discrimination. Female martial arts practitioners sometimes express misogyny, having internalized sexism from the dominant culture and gained acceptance in that dominant culture through expression of that prejudice as a lateral violence. In other words, sexism against women expressed and perpetuated by women. High-ranking Bujinkan practitioners of both male and female genders have been observed openly expressing prejudice against ethno-cultural, LGBTQ+, and socio-economic identities in online forums and during in-person training sessions, seminars, and the social gatherings that take place as part of such events. In one example, during the first 2 Canadian installments of the Kunoichi Project, a photo study of women in non-sport Budo focusing on the Bujinkan, and an event arranged by male and female practitioners, participants were subjected to misogynistic concepts of female identity and prejudice against LGBTQ+ identities. Participants who objected to this discrimination were excluded from participating in the 3rd and final Canadian installment of the project. During the first Kunoichi Taikei, an event organized for women practitioners by women practitioners and inspired by the success of the Kunoichi Project, event organizers refused to engage with persons attempting to confirm that all female practitioners would be welcome, resulting in non-cisgendered female practitioners experiencing exclusion and unwelcome. Subsequent Kunoichi Taikei events avoided this issue by opening attendance to all genders. In a more recent example, a female Bujinkan instructor with a frequent rate of social media posts in Bujinkan forums, and who recently has started a Bujinkan-themed forum of her own, told the members of an international Bujinkan Facebook forum that the forum was for use of English-speaking practitioners only, falsely claiming that the rules of that forum prohibited posts and interactions in other languages and by persons whose predominant language was not English. In an international forum accepting of all nationalities and that has no restriction on primary language, and that is maintained on a platform providing free translation services to facilitate dialogue across multiple primary languages, suggesting the thoughts of certain people don't belong based on their primary language of communication constitutes discrimination against ethno-cultural identity and social location. When members of the forum confronted this racism and alerted forum admins to the breach of rules, as racism is in fact against the forum rules of conduct, no actions were taken by forum admins to discipline the practitioner expressing racism or to ensure that forum members impacted by the experience of racism were made to feel valued, safe, and welcome. Language and consequence. Instructors and other community leaders set the tone for any given training environment. While an instructor is not responsible for every misbehavior, in other words, prejudice, harm, social violence, exclusion, etc., purposeful or accidental, of their students in training spaces and communities, in some training environments, misbehavior is normalized by its embodiment in the instructor or other community leaders. While persons are free to use prejudicial language, no one is free from the consequences of prejudicial language. Prejudices are relics of fear perpetuated by systems of oppression, relics from before we gain knowledge sufficient to understand that cruelty is not the same as competency, that exclusion and oppression weaken us, that strength has many forms, and that inclusion is itself a form of strength. As a species, we are still struggling to have all of our members learn that cruelty and harm are neither an indication of strength and importance, nor an ideal to aspire to achieve. Systems of violence and our methods to combat and mitigate that violence are ever evolving, and our need to be able to defend ourselves and others from various forms of violence continues. While martial communities are not the only environments responsible for reinforcing false notions of power and importance, they are environments that teach their members how to use their bodies and other objects as powerful tools of creating and mitigating violence, suggesting that martial arts communities have an increased ethic of responsibility for not just who, but also what and how they teach, from techniques to value systems. Maintaining prejudicial language and other forms of linguistic and social violence in the training environment/culture limits the range of training opportunities and depth of understanding achievable in and by that training environment/culture. Only by eradicating social violence and increasing inclusiveness can our methods to deal with violence continue to increase in effectiveness. 3. 8 action process to eliminate toxicity and improve inclusiveness in martial arts communities and environments. A specialized approach is required to address habituated prejudice from social violence in order to make possible the evolution from non-inclusive to inclusive martial arts environments and cultures. The approach proposed in this article moves through 8 actions towards inclusiveness. Action 1. Normative type peer group discussion to generate list of potential challenges/fears. Action 2. Identify challenges versus nonsense. Action 3. Consultation with non-members to identify potential harms. Action 4. Assess reactions to identify habituated prejudice and conduct more research. Action 5. Apply the anti-discrimination checklist for martial arts environments and communities to your group or community's current mode of operation. Action 6. Create a plan of approach for increasing inclusiveness. Action 7. Refine your mode of operation and plan of approach through stakeholder consultation. Action 8. Enact new martial arts environment/community/culture. Action 1. Normative type peer group discussion to generate list of potential challenges/fears. Discussion is a key component of any community environment, and the trouble for non-inclusive and/or toxic martial arts communities is that the language they use to discuss their thoughts on inclusiveness is likely to be threaded with ideas and terms that are offensive to the very groups they desire or object to include. While some of this offense may be purposeful, some of it will be inadvertent and unintended. Therefore, the first action towards inclusiveness is discussion within the organization or training group to identify all the items that may be challenging about becoming an inclusive environment or culture, from potential procedural adjustments to financial costs to concerns about required changes. These first discussions may be laden with linguistic violence, some overt and some covert. It is imperative to ensure that non-normative identities within the training group or community are protected from retaliation or other repercussion for sharing their expertise and experience with prejudice and exclusion during this discussion, and in general. Make a list of all items and concerns. Identifying which items and concerns are helpful to inclusion and which items and concerns are nonsense prejudice is the second action towards creating an inclusive training environment and culture. Action 2. Identify challenges versus nonsense. To discern which list items are true challenges towards inclusion and which are prejudicial nonsense, the group next identifies which items on the list they themselves would likely find offensive if applied to or thought about them. Any objections to this action based on the idea that such things would not be applied to or thought about the normative bodies/identities of the training space are dismissed as irrelevant. Sort the items from the list into two categories: challenges and prejudicial nonsense. The table below provides an example of such a list. Challenges: larger training space required, additional protective gear types required, additional knowledge of alternative forms of protective gear required, additional changing spaces required, additional restroom facilities or supplies required, new spoken language rules required, knowledge of non-spoken forms of language required, procedural changes required, signage changes required, updated written materials required, active unlearning of social violence required, safe methods of reporting social violence required, formal processes for responding to social violence required. Nonsense: having to water down the art, having to treat others like fragile porcelain, double standards and habits of exclusion, such as X's are normative to training environments, toxic X culture is harmful to non-X identities, therefore non-X's must accept being harmed by toxic X culture as part of the cost of training. Having to create fitness-centered versions of curriculum, pink or rainbow versions of training uniforms, equipment, advertising, etc. Changing class curriculum based on the identity of students in attendance, rather than basing class curriculum on the training goals and needs of the students in attendance. Fear of not being able to strike at the correct targets based on the gender or other identity of your training partner, rather than based on your training partner's state of physicality/injury. Fear of not being able to use reasonable training force based on the gender or other identity of your training partner, rather than basing appropriate level of force on your partner's physicality, level of ability, and intensity preference for that day's training. Importantly, items on the nonsense side of the list represent a type of challenge that must be met in order for an inclusive training environment to occur. Nonsense, prejudicial ideas about inclusiveness communicate the types and prevalence of social violence normative to the training environment/culture that need to be eradicated and replaced with healthy notions about value, worth, competency, and belonging. Action 3. Consultation with non-members to identify potential harms. Consult with persons who are not part of the training group or community to identify potentially harmful ideas lingering on the challenges list and to identify additional challenges or nonsense that the group discussion may not have identified. Where possible, consult non-normative persons about their knowledge on how harm is caused through the ideas on the nonsense list and to verify that items have been correctly categorized as challenges or nonsense. When requesting consultation from persons, make sure that you ask someone who is able to freely consent without feeling pressured to agree to give consultation or to agree with the ideas of the group, who is comfortable supplying critique, and who is not in a subordinate position to you. For example, do not ask your only female student for her expertise on sexism while also expecting her to validate the idea that the potentially toxic parts of your organizational culture is just boys being boys. And if you do consult your only female student or other marginalized identity, you must ensure they are protected from retaliation and other repercussion from other members in the group. If it is acceptable to the persons you consult, it may be beneficial to ask them to help you improve your understanding of how ideas on the nonsense list are harmful. If multiple persons are available to query, ask more than one person, and receive answers without resistance. Asking questions is encouraged, arguing is discouraged. Action 4. Assess reactions to identify habituated prejudice and conduct more research. Understanding how we came to believe mistaken notions is an important aspect of learning how to free ourselves and others from mistaken notions. After consulting with non-members and/or non-normative identities/bodies of the training environment, organize the new information you have received into things you understand and things you need to research further. Identify any objections to the information you have received, and sort your reactions into another list of challenges versus nonsense. Assess your reactions for lingering barriers in order to identify habituated nonsense, prejudice, and other illogical notions. These habituated prejudices are yours to consistently work to overcome until they are gone from you and your training group/community/culture. Some of your areas of resistance will indicate areas where your understanding is lacking and requires further research. Once you have identified areas for further research, undertake that research to improve your understanding of the core issues and of how perspective bias was taught to and then perpetuated by you and/or members of your training group and/or community. Throughout this process, remember that initial reactions to the topic of social violence are typically steeped in social violence, that even persons who mean well have been taught some form of social violence that they may still need to unlearn, and that what matters is not the mistakes in our first attempts to do well, but what we do afterwards to improve in our future attempts, and the ways we choose to be in this world. Action 5. Apply the anti-discrimination checklist for martial arts environments and communities to your group or community's current mode of operation. Apply the anti-discrimination checklist for martial arts environments and communities to the training group or community's current mode of operation, or normative ways of doing, to identify lingering or difficult elements of toxicity. An anti-discrimination checklist for martial arts environments and communities is provided below. You may expand upon this checklist as your understanding deepens. In this anti-discrimination checklist for martial arts environments and communities, a normative identity/body equals the type of people, physicalities, and/or identities most commonly found in the training environment/community, and non-normative identities/bodies equals the types of people, physicalities, and/or identities least commonly found in the training environment/community. Anti-discrimination checklist for martial arts environments and communities. 1. Does a behavior towards, phrase about, idea about, or expectation applied to non-normative identities/bodies in the training space insult, demean, other, or exclude non-normative identities/bodies or otherwise discourage them from feeling welcome? What changes in the group/community members will remove prejudicial behavior and other barriers to inclusion? 2. Does a behavior toward, phrase about, idea about, or expectation applied to non-normative identities/bodies in the training space encourage, indicate, or make more likely an abuse of power? What changes in the expectations, behavior, and procedures of the group/community will reduce the risk of abuses of power? 3. Does a behavior toward, phrase about, idea about, or expectation applied to non-normative identities/bodies in the training space communicate or encourage notions of violence against those identities/bodies? What actions will remove expressions of prejudicial violence from the training group/environment/community? 4. Does a behavior toward, phrase about, idea about, or expectation applied to non-normative identities/bodies in the training space originate in cultural oppression, marginalization, or prejudice, individual, institutional, or systemic? If so, does the training environment purposefully enact cultural oppression as a form of gatekeeping so as to keep out non-normative identities/bodies? What actions will eliminate instances of cultural oppression, marginalization, or other prejudice in the training environment, community, or culture? 5. Does the broader society, culture, and/or community wherein the training is located enact and perpetuate prejudicial ideas about the non-normative identities/bodies? If so, what prejudice may unintentionally or intentionally linger in the ideas and habits of the training group/community/culture? What are strategies to identify and oust those modes of discrimination and unlearn patterns of discriminatory thinking? 6. Does a behavior toward, phrase about, idea about, or expectation applied to non-normative identities/bodies in the training space feel like it would be insulting or discriminatory if applied to the normative identities/bodies common to the training environment? If so, how do the normative and non-normative identities/bodies want to be treated, thought of, or trained? And what methods and practices will ensure that equity of respect and quality training without prejudice, violence, toxicity, or other harm will be provided to non-normative identities and bodies? 7. What forms of power do the normative identity, physicality, or social location of the training group or community have over non-normative identities/physicality/social locations? Does the approach to and attitude within the training environment/community/culture function as gatekeeping to make it less likely that non-normative identities/physicalities will feel interested or welcome and safe in the training environment, or welcome and safe to participate in the training community? What actions will remove power imbalances? What actions will remove barriers to welcome, safety, and participation or inclusion? 8. Are the resources, facilities, instruction, or opportunities being offered to non-normative identities/bodies of lesser quality than that offered to normative identities/bodies? What actions will alleviate inequality? 9. Is an attitude/approach intended or likely to subjugate, subordinate, oppress, insult, demean, marginalize, oust, exclude, or cause harm, physical, psychological, financial, or social, to non-normative identities/bodies who may enter the training environment or community? 10. Does an attitude, normative way of doing, or approach within the training community or culture increase the likelihood that normative members of the training environment/community will have internalized and enact prejudice toward non-normative identities/bodies that may access or want to access the training environment or community? 11. How can attitudes/approaches be altered to alleviate potential harm, threat, insult, exclusion, subjugation, subordination, and other forms of marginalization toward non-normative identities/bodies within the training environment/community? 12. Who is most likely to be harmed by things that are expressed in or by the training environment/community? What changes can be enacted to eliminate that harm? 13. Who is most likely to be harmed or excluded by operating procedures and the normative ways of doing in the training environment/community? What changes can be enacted to eliminate that harm and increase inclusiveness? 14. Who is most likely to be harmed by elements of the instruction, training, or practice methods that occur in the training environment/community? What changes can be enacted to eliminate that harm? 15. Is the physical infrastructure or other aspect of the training environment a barrier to access? What changes will increase accessibility? 16. Who is the messaging of advertising likely to entice, and who is the messaging likely to discourage? What changes to messaging will increase the diversity of persons enticed to attend or learn more about training? 17. Is the cost of training a financial barrier to participation for certain demographics who might otherwise have aptitude for or interest in training? What policy changes will remove financial barriers for all practitioners? 18. What financial barriers exist for practitioners as they advance through the training system? What policy changes will remove financial barriers and other forms of gatekeeping? 19. Does the training methodology create unnecessary barriers to success or other forms of discouragement? What changes to the methodology will remove unnecessary barriers? 20. Does the community culture create social barriers to success? What changes in the community culture will alleviate those barriers? 21. Are concepts of success held by practitioners woven with social violence? For example, don't be a pussy? If so, What changes to the training culture can repair those constructs? 22. What is your idea of the ideal, ongoing achievements of a martial artist? What elements of shame are present in your ideal's definition of failure versus success? How does your ideal, or the language through which you understand or express your ideal, change when shame and other elements of prejudice are removed from and replaced in the definition of success? How can you best provide an ongoing, shame-free, non-prejudicial experience of achievement for yourself and other practitioners? If you are uncertain how to answer the questions on the checklist, find someone in your community who can help. Collaboration is key to inclusion. Return to the checklist on an ongoing basis to ensure that exclusion and toxicity do not return or linger hidden in your normative ways of doing. Action 6. Create a plan of approach for increasing inclusiveness. Create a plan of approach to increase inclusiveness in the training group and/or community. Use the strategies, concerns, challenges, and knowledge identified in actions 1 through 5 to inform your plan of approach. Action 7. Refine your mode of operation and plan of approach through stakeholder consultation. Consultation with stakeholders is an important aspect of teamwork required for community growth and increased inclusion. While the new operational methods and plan of approach for increasing inclusiveness may be largely decided before any stakeholder consultation, it is important to gather feedback from a variety of perspectives in order to identify and mitigate potential mistakes. Consult both with group/community members and with non-members to identify challenges and issues of concern that indicate where aspects of the operational methods, new normative ways of doing, and plan of approach may be improved, and to identify orders of importance for necessary changes and actions. Refine your new mode of operation and plan of approach based on the stakeholder feedback. Presenting the new mode of operation and the plan of approach to stakeholders for discussion and feedback may result in several rounds of discussion and refinement. Clearly communicate to group/community members which prejudicial, faulty, toxic, or otherwise harmful behaviors, ideas, and procedures are being retired from the training environment/community, along with the methods that will be enacted to help eliminate those behaviors, ideas, and procedures. Allow space for the expression of lingering hesitations/concerns. These hesitations and concerns will help you identify the areas of change that might be the most challenging for the group/community. Knowing the most challenging areas for change will help you identify the most likely types and sites of harm that group or community members may enact, purposely or accidentally, as inclusion increases. During discussion, have the group develop strategies to mitigate potential harm arising from hesitations/concerns in order to foster a sense of teamwork toward a shared common goal of improving the training environment/community/culture. Set and communicate clear expectations for all group/community members to learn and enact the new mode of doing, framing the change like any other required acquisition of skill. Action 8. Enact new martial arts environment/community/culture. Undoing cultural propaganda is difficult and often lifelong work. While harm cannot be allowed to continue, shame belongs to the realm of social violence and is not the best teaching tool for eliminating prejudice. Methods for exemplifying and teaching new modes of doing without social violence must be developed and refined as a continual process, informed and improved through research and interaction. Progress is best achieved through communication, support, education, and encouragement. Each of us is raised in some form of nonsense soup, if different versions thereof. Just as once we each did not understand the martial arts and had to be taught, so too do our peers and communities need to be taught what they do not yet understand about toxic culture and social violence, how prejudice and toxicity wrecks each individual internally, even as it tears apart those subjected to its external expression, and that we are each embittered when surrounded by peers and communities who celebrate and embolden diversity. Conclusions. Normative ways of doing in martial arts groups, environments, and communities may encourage and entrench prejudicial behavior and culture that creates a barrier to participation for persons who are non-normative to that training group, environment, or community. Creating welcoming and inclusive training groups, communities, environments, and cultures requires identification of linguistic violence and other forms of discrimination and prejudice present in the normative ways of doing for any martial arts training group, community, environment, and/or culture. Undoing toxicity in an established martial arts training group, community, environment, or culture requires consultation with stakeholders, current participants, and excluded identities through an anti-discrimination approach in order to identify areas of toxicity, develop strategies for change, learn and teach non-prejudicial systems of meaning, refine operating standards and procedures, and enact improved normative ways of doing.